Baltimore, and getting up early and staying up late with the Birds at Oriole Park at Camden Yards as they start to pick up their pace a little bit here against the Royals. But the Ravens went back to pick up their pace in practice again on Tuesday. And Luke, my dude, I mean, stop with these WNST texts. I don't need any of them anymore, you know?
It's really been incredible. And look, I mean, the injuries have been a major narrative over the last, really since the Super Bowl. Even go back to the Super Bowl year with the number of guys they lost that year, whether it was Suggs in the offseason, Ray Lewis, Ladarius Webb, and they were able to overcome that. But we've been talking a lot about injuries, and I want to point out to everyone, because I've gotten this question a ton, the Ravens have revamped their off-season training program over the last 2 years, and that was in response to the injuries from 2013 and 2014 and 2015. So this is not something they're turning a blind eye toward. Now, you can certainly argue that whatever they've done may not have worked or may be creating other problems. I don't know. I don't know how many of these you can really point to and say, well, that's because of something with the off-season training program. I don't know, but this is my 9th training camp, I believe, covering the team, and it is just incredible to see the number of injuries that they've sustained in such a short period of time. I mean, they have lost 5 players to season-ending injuries since June 1st. I mean, and they
contributing guys, not. I mean, Saragusa was going to play this year.
He was going to be, he's probably going to be their top reserve interior lineman. I think that's what the plan was with him. But yeah, I mean, they've lost 5 guys to season-ending injuries, and then you take into account John Urschel retiring and Darren Waller being suspended for a year. So since June 1st, and keep in mind, they've only, since June 1st. They've maybe had around a dozen practices, maybe a few more than that. But, we're not talking about 2 months worth of practices. We're just talking about 2 months as far as a calendar. And they've lost 7 players for the season, 5 of those because of injuries. And, that doesn't include your 32-year-old quarterback who is dealing with a cranky back right now, even if it's minor. That's certainly concerning and has had everyone talking about Colin Kaepernick and Ryan Mallett as a result. And that also doesn't include Maurice Kennedy, who suffered a long-term knee injury. John Harbaugh said he should have a chance to return, but he was the one that was the favorite to replace Tavon Young as the nickel corner. I mean, Brashad Perriman had some hamstring tightness on Tuesday. So you just go down this list, and I don't care how optimistic you are. I don't care how high your expectations are for the Ravens in 2017. I'm not saying the season's over by any stretch. Don't misconstrue, but you're kidding yourself if you're not sitting here looking at this roster, looking at this infirmary report, looking at the number of injuries that have been of the season-ending variety already. And we're still over a week out from the first preseason game. To look at all of that and to not be very, very concerned. I mean, I don't know what to tell you at that point. I mean, unless you just are waving the purple pom-poms just because, I don't know how you can look at this roster right now, look at the overall health of this team or lack thereof, and not have some very significant concerns.
Well, you got to be concerned about Flacco. Let's start with that.
Sure.
We could talk about backup linemen, and we could talk about tight ends. We could talk about all of that. But if Colin Kaepernick and or Ryan Mallett or the Arena Football League, David Olson, whoever the hell, who's gone now, right?
He was
exactly. How little we knew ye.
I know.
Without Flacco, until I see Flacco standing upright on September 10th in Cincinnati under center, I know they have no shot, right? I mean, literally, they have no shot if he's not upright on September 10th. So I'm not going to, as our head coach Brian Billick would say around here, pee down my leg, the first week of August. But, the clouds are forming. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And as much as people are going to beat Ozzie and John and everybody up at the end of the year if this doesn't go well, they did lay out some pretty decent plans here in the offseason to become a better team, sort of connecting all the dots and drafting on defense and signing Macklin and, having to figure out the Wagner thing and figure out the Zach Orr thing and the other and the Pitta thing. It's been managed relatively well. And now they're still here, and you're out there every day saying nobody's throwing a solid pass in our camp anymore because number 5's not out there in the red jersey right now.
Yeah, I mean, it does begin and end with Flacco. I totally agree with that. I mean, until we see him out there on the field, I mean, everything else kind of feels like a moot point. Everything else kind of feels like just details. And it's not to say that Colin Kaepernick couldn't come in here and win some games for the Ravens. It's not to say that Ryan Mallett, if pressed into duty, couldn't win a game for you.
By the way, he stunk, right? Like, I watched him throw some quails the other night down at the stadium. He hasn't been very good, right?
No, he hasn't. And the offense has been, in general, has been dreadful. And one thing, and I wrote about this in my 12 Ravens thoughts on the first week of training camp, which you can find at WNST.net right now. Let's be clear not to shortchange the defense in the process of criticizing the offense. I mean, this defense, as you pointed out, virtually all their offseason resources were pumped into the defense, other than Danny Woodhead and Jeremy Maclin, who kind of fell into their laps. I mean, I don't know if that's something they were, that they definitely envisioned happening. I think it was a scenario they thought could happen, but I'm not sure they were counting on that as being a top offensive priority for them. It was defense, defense, defense. And, with that come very high expectations. And I said this to you after the draft. I said the way that the Ravens have proceeded in this offseason, this defense better not just be really good, better not just be top 10. It needs to be a top 3, top 4 kind of unit. Otherwise, to me, it's hard to justify the number of resources they put into the defense.
They're going to be kicking some field goals this year.
Well, and this is where I'll disagree with you a little bit as far as how they proceeded in the offseason. This offense stunk last year, and they lost some critical pieces. Now, the Maclin addition makes it look better, but again, I looked at this offense on paper, and I'm hard-pressed to say it's definitely going to be better than it was last year. They've said they want to run the football, but they've said that for 3 off seasons now. Until they actually do it and do it effectively, I remain skeptical, even though I really did like the Greg Roman hire. But this is where I am concerned, and this is where you do kind of look at the off season and say, well, you didn't do a whole lot with your offensive line. You didn't do a ton with your offense. Yes, they added Jeremy Maclin, but keep in mind they lost Steve Smith and they lost Kamar Aiken, and they ended up losing Dennis Pitta to an injury that they knew very well could happen. It's not as though that was a shock, even though it was terribly disappointing for everyone who likes Dennis Pitta. But now we look at these injuries that they've suffered since June 1st. Tavon Young, okay, defense there, fine, even though that's a pretty significant loss on that side of the ball. But Dennis Pitta, Darren Waller to suspension, Kenneth Dixon, John Urschel to retirement, Crockett Gilmore, Nico Siragusa, who was the first offensive player they drafted in April. Of those 7 players, 6 of them on the offensive side of the ball. It never seems to fail. We talked about this a couple years ago with the corners. We've talked about it years where they've been lighter at wide receiver. It never seems to fail that the injuries tend to find you where you're a little bit weaker, where you might be a little more vulnerable. At least that feels like that's been the case for the Ravens the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, it felt that way when Tavon Young went down in the secondary 2 months ago. It feels that way this week with the Siragusa thing. Sure. I mean, and the quarterback position, we're kind of vulnerable there behind Flacco as well. Yeah. Well,
and I mean, that's tough. I mean, I remember a lot of people that really liked the fact that the Ravens signed Matt Schaub a couple years ago. If you remember my thought on it, I thought they were spending a little bit too much money on a backup quarterback who really wasn't any good anymore, and you saw what happened. Flacco got hurt, and Matt Schaub was terrible. So, I mean, that one I can understand a little bit more, but they lost 2 starters on the offensive line. They haven't replaced them. They've now lost a couple guys that maybe kind of, sort of could have been, certainly John Urschel was in that discussion. Nico Siragusa probably wasn't going to start. There would have had to have been some crazy things that would have happened for him to be a starter, probably a couple more injuries, and him stepping up as a healthy option. But, it's concerning because, again, this offense was below average last year, and they've lost some key pieces. They did add a couple key pieces. I get that. I'm not saying they didn't do anything, but did they do enough? I think that's certainly something that can be debated. And now when you see this run of injuries and losses that they've had on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, take the tight end position, for example. I mean, 2 months ago we were talking about, how is this team going to try to, they have these 6 tight ends, and, there's guys with baggage and question marks, but there's also guys you like in that group. How are they going to find a way to keep them all? Well, now 3 of them are out of the picture for the rest of the year, and 2 of the others, Ben Watson and Max Williams, are coming off of very serious injuries. Ben Watson's 36 years old. Max Williams is coming off of a knee surgery that had never been performed on an NFL player before. So can you really count on either one of those guys? I don't know. Nick Boyle, who, strictly from an on-field standpoint, probably looks like the safest bet they have right now, but he's 1 failed drug test away from a 2-year ban for PEDs. So, I mean, it's just, they added Larry Donnell from the Giants. I think that was a prudent move given where they stand right now.
He's got great hair, by the way.
Yeah. But
I just wanted to point that out. Most people don't see that.
I agree. I had a chance to see him.
He's got that Oscar Gamble 76 thing going on.
Yeah. But there's just that's just one position, and I don't want people listening right now thinking that I'm proclaiming the season to be over. I mean, the only thing that could happen right now, or I'd say, season probably over.
Dude, don't be negative. We haven't even had a pint in London yet. You know what I mean?
I can't be Mr. Purple-tinted glasses either and look at what's going on and tell you that everything's okay and everything's fine, because there are a lot of question marks on this football team right now, and I think a lot of the focus being on Colin Kaepernick, and I get that. I understand that. I've fed into that as much as anyone else because it's a very compelling, fascinating story. But I think that's covered up a lot of concerns for this football team that were there going into training camp, and now with the injuries that they've had on top of that, it just really highlights some pretty significant question marks for this football team. And losing 2 more players for the season on Tuesday certainly didn't help.
Well, at least the Orioles are back in the pennant race, right?
Well, they're approaching 500 again. I hesitate to say back in the pennant race.
Hey, can you shed a little light, because I'm not out at the practices every day. You are. Fans aren't out there anymore. We all saw them run around on Sunday, and Sunday's more of like a party, right, with the fireworks. Not to say they don't take the practice seriously,
Sure.
but Harbaugh clearly loves that practice. I think the organization loves that practice. I think they've embraced it. I think it's kind of cool that they get together down at the stadium and one night, and the parking's not a pain in the ass too much, and there's some food, and it's much more accessible than, let's say, Westminster was, just from a pragmatic standpoint. But then they get back out there. These are kind of quiet, lonely amidst the construction, all of that going on. There had been so much made about the seriousness of this time of year, and Harbaugh going from 2-a-days to 1-a-days in the union and all that stuff. Give everybody a little bit of a taste of being back on the back fields this time of year. They're cranking the music up and doing all that stuff. What's the vibe out there in sort of a shutdown practice that feels more regular season? Because the training camp part of this thing that we see on Hard Knocks and stuff, a lot of that's kind of gone away. The bunking and, all of that. We're going to cross the road in Westminster and get peach pie. And, for the fans, that's all gone. They're sort of sequestered now, and other than you and a handful of people, there aren't many people that get back there and watch them throw it around. It is a different kind of camp, right?
It definitely is. It definitely has, as you pointed it out, it's a perfect way to describe it. It feels a lot more like the regular season. I mean, there's not that atmosphere other than having a few select groups, from time to time. And when I say groups, you're talking maybe 20 or 30 people. It's not, I have not seen a day yet other than inviting the players' families. I believe that was Saturday in Owings Mills. There just hasn't been any semblance of an atmosphere compared to what you've come to expect. And it hasn't been anywhere close to what it was in Westminster for all those years. But they had gotten to the point where they were able to welcome a few hundred fans, several hundred fans out to the facility before they began the construction. So they had that kind of an atmosphere going, which I think helps the players. Talking to guys over the years, in practicing in a training camp environment like Westminster all those years compared to it being kind of self-contained and a controlled environment, there is a little bit of a different atmosphere there. And I don't think it really has a huge impact on preparations one way or the other. But as far as morale, as far as energy level in any given practice, I think having the crowd out there helps. And I know players have spoken about that, and they're kind of missing that right now. Now you hear more. You can hear the sound of construction in the background, and it's kind of. It
feels like week 6, right?
yeah, and it's kind of up to the players to kind of give themselves their own energy. And certainly you have some characters, Terrell Suggs, a couple others here and there. It's not an overwhelming cast of characters in that regard, but you got a few guys hooping and hollering, and Eric Weddle in that group as well.
Well, let's be honest. There's too many guys out there fighting for their job for them to be slapping around, right? I mean, literally, everybody's out there looking to get one more play, understanding that, Terrell Suggs is Terrell Suggs, but if I'm Tim Williams, I get after the quarterback better, I'm going to get some snaps, Yeah,
and you understand that Terrell Suggs is one injury away from not being in the equation anymore. It's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately, as the Ravens have learned time and time again here in such a short period of time. But, it really, there's a lot of opportunity on this football team on both sides of the ball. As much as we've talked about the defense, we've talked about the secondary, you look in that front seven, there are some jobs to be won. The way it looks right now, the starting defensive line, we've seen Michael Pierce at nose tackle, Brandon Williams sliding over to the 3 technique quite a bit. So I'm interested to see how that plays out year 2 after Michael Pierce had such a good rookie season coming out of nowhere. Brent Urban right now is the leader in the clubhouse to be the 5 technique defensive end, but we'll see Kafusi, we'll see Chris Wormley in the mix there. There's other guys like Carl Davis fighting for a roster spot right now. He's a former 3rd-round pick, but he's someone who really needs to have a strong summer. So you have that. You have Correa at the inside linebacker spot next to Mosley. You have the competition for the Sam linebacker job, which right now looks like Matt Judon, who, by the way, looks about 20 pounds lighter than he did as a rookie. Easily the biggest change in body form of any player on that team, and he's looked the part so far, has looked solid dropping in the coverage, and can still get after it off the edge. So I think he's someone they have high expectations for. But that's just the defense. That's the side of the ball that you feel good about. Then you go over to the offense, and you ask yourself, can Ryan Jensen do the job at center? Can James Hurst, who's been so maligned over the last 3 years, can he hold down the right tackle spot? Which he played better there than he did at left tackle in previous instances last year, but still a very fair question to ask there. And then you talk about tight end, you talk about running back. There's just there are a lot of unknowns on the offensive side of the ball. But as I pointed out, there's some jobs to be won on the defensive side. So if you are a young guy, you might miss. And those guys, a lot of them are just ignorant because to the idea of a training camp atmosphere because they never lived it. They weren't part of the team.
But Ladarius Webb remembers, and Suggs, and Sam Cook.
Only a few guys now at this point.
Joe?
The last time they were there was, 2010. It's been quite a while since they've been at McDaniel College.
I told Ladarius Webb the other day he's making me feel young, being around there still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keeps me young.
One of the elder statesmen, one of the few. So, but, those young guys, as much as you can kind of get caught up in the atmosphere of training camp, all they know is how the Ravens are handling it right now, and there are some opportunities on this football team. As much as I've painted doom and gloom from an injury standpoint and from more concern with the offensive side of the ball right now, you do look at it on the flip side and say, well, some of these young guys they've drafted, whether it's this year, last year, or some guys who haven't panned out to this point but still have an opportunity, seize the opportunity. The moment's now for a lot of these guys, and if they get a nice handful of young players to step forward in addition to the young players we saw step forward in 2016, then you like this team's chances much, much more moving forward.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke. He will be on the backfields of Owings Mills. And in the warehouse at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and in the locker room after the game as the Orioles are taking on the Royals this week. You can find us out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper is outstanding in digital and ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning, all powered by Planet Fitness. If there's any more breaking news, and God help us if there is, out of Owings Mills, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday discussing all of these injuries and offense and defense and the fake football matchup with the Washington Redskins next Thursday night. I'm so lucky to have 2 tickets. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports